44. The Civil Revolution, Part 2. On October the 7th, 1984, 24 nuns signed an advertisement in the New York Times declaring that opposition to abortion is not the only legitimate Catholic position. The Vatican ordered their superiors to secure their recantation or dismiss them. On June the 9th, 1988, two of the nuns, Barbara Ferraro and Patricia Hussey, met the press to praise their superiors for defying the Vatican doctrine, and they called it an enormous victory for all women, especially nuns. The two nuns declared, "The victory confirms us in the belief that by entering a religious community, we do not give up who we are as feeling and thinking human beings." Priests, monks, nuns, and bishops have been defying the Vatican for centuries, but the reasons for the defiance have shifted. The defiance now reflects the civil revolution. Moreover, the defiance is based on claims of a truer morality, and the Vatican is indicted for failing to conform to a more ostensibly enlightened moral standard. Behind this is the civil revolution. Biblical faith is covenantal faith. A covenant is a treaty of law between two parties. Covenants between equals means an agreement on the law terms and an equal input as to the character of the agreed law. A covenant of unequals is a covenant of grace, whereby the superior graciously gives his law to the inferior. God's covenant with man is thus a covenant of both grace and law. Because law is a religious fact, God permits no covenants or treaties by his people with ungodly nations. Exodus chapter 23, verses 31 to 33, chapter 34, verses 12 to 16, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 to 4. With the Enlightenment, men secularized the doctrine of the covenant into the social contract, a treaty between equals. John Locke, 1632 to 1704, developed this concept extensively. His thinking had roots in Aristotle's view of man as a political animal who, of necessity, had to live in terms of agreed civil polities and laws. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 1712 to 1778, added to the doctrine. The social contract was formed to protect the individual and his property rights. One consequence, as in England, was the passage of numerous laws requiring the death penalty for even minor thefts. An age that prided itself on having outgrown religious intolerance showed far greater intolerance towards the violation of property rights. The 20th century transferred the intolerance to politico-economic dissent and has murdered millions while boasting of its superiority to the age of faith. John Locke, in his Essay Concerning Human Understanding, Book 2, Chapter 27, denied original sin and the curse and asserted man's rational control over and responsibility for all his actions. Hence, society represents not a fallen order, but a social contract, the rational consent of men. Civil government is thus a radical contract. It represents rational order. Much later, Hegel was to see the state as God walking on earth, as Geist or Spirit incarnate. For Locke, the state was reason, and Locke's hope for man's salvation was in effect civil. The chief end of civil government was, for Locke, the protection of property. In terms of this faith, England passed law after law calling for the death penalty for theft, and for any infraction of property rights. For Locke, freedom meant having rules to live by legislated by civil government. For Locke, freedom from absolute and arbitrary power meant representative government. For Locke, this civil order was one of the propertied men. For him, natural rights were rational rights, and the social contracts was the order of reason. The order of reason was the will of the majority. A dissenting minority might complain that its rights were being violated. According to Locke, a government must be by majority legislative decision, unless a number larger than the majority is specifically stipulated. This follows from the intention of the social contract or original compact. But how are we to understand that a man enters into this compact? By a declaration express or tacit. And what is a sign of tacit compact? The answer is residence, the compact lasting so long as does the residence. He is at liberty to go and incorporate himself into any other commonwealth, or agree with others to begin a new one in vacuus locus, in the wide open spaces. Since Locke's day, however, the state as the personification of reason has moved away from the protection of property to the taxing and even confiscation of property for the rational goals of the civil revolution. In the Western democracies, heavy taxation is the rule. In Marxist states, confiscation normally prevails. These steps are taken by the state as the requirements of reason. Of course, after Rousseau, God's will has been replaced by a new infallibility, the general will of the people. Since this general will is unknown until it is expressed, the state has no sure criterion except a supposedly developing general will. Because the general will has replaced God's will, there is a shift of emphasis from man's duty to God to man's rights. Rights having replaced duties, the focus of society is shifted from production to consumption. Man lives as a consumer, not as a creature made in the image of God and required to serve him with all his heart, mind, and being. It is not God who must be served, but man and the state. God as a lawgiver has been replaced by man. In 1962, Robert M. Hutchins said, "I believe that government is indispensable, contrary to Kropotkin and the anarchists, and I believe that law is the expression of reason and not the expression of arbitrary power. I take violent opposition to the jurisprudence prevalent in most of the law schools of this country, and in England as well, that the law is what the courts will do, or that law is the command of the sovereign. Law has to be judged in terms of its contribution to the common good. Law, therefore, is good or bad in terms of whether or not it makes that contribution. Government is the essential means by which the political community moves toward the common good. If any particular government, or any particular law, or any particular legal system does not contribute to the common good, then what should be done is to find out why the government and the law do not contribute to the common good, and the government and the law should be changed." Note that for Hutchins, civil law was the expression of reason. The test of the law's rationality was, for him, its contribution to the common good, because not the church, but the state and its law is the essential means by which the political community moves toward the common good. How do we know when the state fails the common good, and by what standard? What if the state decrees the death of all Jews or of all Christians? Why was Hutchins never greatly concerned about the murder of the Russian clergy and many believers? The problem, from Locke through Rousseau and on to the present, is the rejection of God's law as the standard of justice and the rejection of the doctrine of sin. Because man's sin is discounted, man's reason is held to be good, when in fact it served the purposes of sinful man. Sin is the basic pattern of fallen man. He delights in it, sees it as self-expression, and as a means to power. Some illustrations can be cited. During the Depression of the 1930s, men in key positions in federal agencies took payoffs for jobs in the form of sexual submission from women employees. Shortly after the war, I was told of one such official who had described such activity as the best kind of payoff: no money to be traced and no outside witnesses. Is this the state as reason and justice? A German told me that at the end of World War II, when entrance into universities was difficult and the waiting lists were long, the registration of young women was high and virtually all were beautiful. Entrance was by sexual payoffs. Is this the university as a life of reason? Friedrich Heer, the Austrian historian, reported that after World War I, at the very gates of Vienna, a priest was dismissed from his post because he dared to preach against the jus primae noctis, the right to the first nights with every newly married peasant woman on the manor, which had been claimed by the lord, who was his ecclesiastical patron. This was a system long upheld by both peasants and lords alike. If the priority of Christ and the triune God over every sphere of life is removed, then moral and social anarchy begins to prevail. The alternative to the reign of God is the reign of sin. The civil revolution has denied the priority of God and his law in favour of reasons of state. The state, as man's rational order, has steadily eroded every area of life to create a mounting disorder. The civil revolution has exalted the state, but it is producing anarchy